Shalom everyone, you're all here again with another special recording as promised. This week we actually have some people call it the practical Torah. I actually want to refer to this one as the insight to the laws of Niddah, and with a focus on the place of our significant other as men. And this week I actually have my wife with me. Her name is Naomi. Not Naomi, not Naomi, it's Naomi. That's how it's properly pronounced. And how about you introduce yourself?
I'm Naomi.
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 So the thing is as follows. Naomi's never done this before, and her English, though her parents are from the United States, her English is not as good as mine. And this is why she's going to need a little bit of help here to explain these matters. But it goes like this. Naomi grew up in an Orthodox family. Her parents came from the United States. And her parents returned to Torah back somewhere in the 1970s. They came to Israel, 1979, 78?
I never thought of numbers, I don't know.
It's somewhere in either the late 70s or
30 years ago.
Over 30 years ago, about 35 years ago. And the lifestyle that both Naomi and I grew up with is Orthodox lifestyle. And the type of schooling that we went through actually put us through studying Tanakh as well. I mean, what was the school you studied at?
Orot Etzion.
Orot Etzion, which is in Gush Etzion. So Naomi also grew up.
We focused mostly on learning Torah by how it's written.
Yeah, the focus was to actually learn Tanakh as is. So I grew up with almost the same idea, except for the fact that they pushed a lot of Rashi into what we were studying. The circles that Naomi actually came from were people who walked around the land with the Bible in hand. So these were people who actually lived in what we can literally call biblical land. I mean,
yes, it is.
You grew up in Elazar, and Elazar is just south of Jerusalem. That's literally when you think of the road to Bethlehem.
Yeah, it was just down the road was Hebron.
Yeah, you travel down the road for about 40 minutes, you're at Hebron. But when I said the road to Bethlehem, for example, I mean, you literally had to travel through...
Yeah.
You had to travel next to Bethlehem for many, many years.
Yeah, we did.
And the manner of type of life that she grew up with was really in biblical lands. I mean, I grew up in the Galilee, which is also biblical lands. I mean, some of the most important archaeological sites period are found like 30 minutes away from where I live. But Judea is Judea. I mean, tell us a little about growing up in Judea.
It was amazing. There's sun, there's it's out. You basically live bateva,
in nature.
In nature. You don't live by yourself, but you basically live, I don't know.
These are small communities.
It's small communities. You can go between communities. You have lots of nature between them.
And one of the more interesting things is that there's also a lot of archaeology there.
Yeah, we did. We had a fountain in a nachal.
They had a stream, fountains.
This underground stream next to our house.
Which is, by the way, very important to our subject, because we're also going to talk about the subject of washing or cleansing after the Niddah. And so, I mean, I actually lived. I was basically a lone soldier, which meant I didn't really have a home. So I actually lived. When I was leave from base, I actually used to come over to her parents' house and stay there for Shabbat and so on. And so these are Torah keeping communities, and you have your quirky characters in those places as well.
Yeah, you have your strange people and Americans and all kinds of...
Not that she's saying that Americans are strange. Don't misunderstand that.
No, don't misunderstand. Amazing people, really amazing.
So one of the things as well is that your father is a big Bible buff.
My father is.
You walk into his workroom and there's Bibles stacked all over the place, different translations, and a lot of commentary as well. So you basically grew up with Tanakh in hand.
Yes, we learned it. It was Shabbat, my father had a small Dvar Torah.
Dvar Torah is basically a small...
Something about
something
small about
the actual portion.
The portion, or something about life.
But your father tends to go really to, in a lot of places, to Pshat.
He does.
I mean, his upbringing is specifically with where he comes from. I mean, they studied Tanakh, and he asked a lot of questions as a young man.
He did.
So he specifically came to Torah by just reading the Tanakh and trying to understand things correctly. So the thing that we want to talk about this week, and this is why I have my wife with me, is the laws of Niddah. And I, for a very long time, was very particular about the fact that men are the ones that make all the decisions, and until you get married, it's not really significant to us in our world today. I mean, we as kids, we learned dinei tum'ah, the laws of impurity. For example, in Leviticus. I mean, you learned it as well, somewhere around the 5th grade.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, and you open up and you read all these things. So we grew up with this mentality of recognizing these things. It wasn't hidden from us. I mean, you were in the 5th grade, which meant you were about 10, 11, something like that. 10.
Actually, we learned it earlier because the way we learned. But yeah.
Oh, okay. So with us, it was around the 5th grade. With them, it was like earlier.
Fourth grade.
4th grade. I mean, but you were basically learning Genesis. So you're basically doing
everything.
We
learned it by order.
Yeah. So as you can see, growing up in the type of environment she grew up with Tanakh as well. Did you have any, when you were growing up reading Tanakh, did you ever have any questions about, how, I mean, you look at the verse and you look at what we're doing today and you're like, I don't know about that.
No, usually it made sense. There are a few portions in the Torah that are not life matter. But they say this is connected to the time that there was Beit HaMikdash, and when it will be, when we'll build it again, we'll use it. Most of the things were just practical, it was useful.
And specifically, for example, your father being a farmer, working in the orchards of Gush Etzion, you knew everything about Tumot Ma'asrot.
Yeah, we did. We did it at home.
They did it at home as well. I mean, most of us today, we kind of... Yeah, if you live here in Israel, most of it's done before you actually even consume the food. And specifically, for example, me being a Levite, I mean, her father would sometimes, here's a whole bunch of stuff that we made, enjoy. And your father's done that quite a few times.
He did.
I think one of the more interesting experiences was the wine pressing that you guys used to do.
Every year he would pick the grapes, put them in a big tub, and he would just get in barefoot and press the grapes. It was fun.
And you would produce wine.
He would make wine and grape juice. First it was grape juice.
Exactly. And I've done that with him a couple of times. And then, there's wine, and he distributes it out goes to a Levite family, says, here's your portion, here's a portion for the Kohanim, here's this, here's that. So it was basically living Tanakh, living Torah, in really living Torah. I mean, one of the lamentations of, one of the laments that the Chafetz Chaim wrote, you remember that little blue book?
Yeah.
By the Chafetz Chaim. I mean, it's another book. It's another book of people wanting to bring back Torah to its reality.
That was basic for school.
Yeah, they had to, but the book itself, he doesn't go into details of, how do you rabbinically keep a mitzvah. He was more accounting the types of mitzvot, giving the verse, and then kind of giving a very short interpretation. One of the laments that he gave was that out of the entire Torah, we only live a small fraction of it. But when you live in a place like where you grew up with farming and everything, and people who have herds, I mean, you have their goats.
They had chickens there. With goats, not so much chickens.
But in the area, there are goats.
There are goats in the area.
And chickens, there aren't any halachot regarding chickens, but you grow up with an environment where you actually are living off of the land, and you're actually living Torah. Really living Torah, because the tithe in Jewish understanding, and really when you read the Tanakh, you see it's strongly connected to actually living on the land itself, that you're actually living it for real.
Yeah, we did. We used to go to the next settlement by foot, because why should we why ride? Like 10 minutes away. Okay, let's walk.
Yeah, and you basically, what she basically is trying to say about this is you're actually living on the land. The direction what she was trying to say here is that you could walk by foot to the next town, and you could just walk through nature and see the type of nature that God actually blessed this land with. And it's basically, these are communities which are really, really strongly connected to nature because these are productive communities.
Yeah.
So one of the subjects, we learned Leviticus at a very, very young age, and we knew. I knew exactly what it meant when you learn Leviticus, when you learn Numbers as well, Bamidbar, and you read the segments that deal with purity, clean and unclean. So we understood these principles.
As kids, we understood them very basically. We knew there will come a time that we'll have a period, but it was very, very basic. And then when it got to be
when it becomes applicable,
they taught us deeper into it.
Yeah, exactly. So it was something that was really part of our education. But what's very interesting is the fact that when we got married, and we got married very, very young, at least very young for most people. I mean, I was 20. We got engaged when you were 19. I was 20. We turned 20 by the time we got married. But the thing is that I personally was studying the laws of Niddah, especially the rabbinic laws of Niddah, way before we got married, because they said this is a practical part of life. Not only is a practical part of life in the sense of I'm going to get married and we're going to have to keep certain things, but you also have to remember that laws of Niddah actually have applications to the concept of cleanliness. You actually have to be aware of certain things the moment you have to go to the temple. And I lived in an environment, I developed an environment around me where we were very temple concentrated. But even in your world, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, the temple coming.
Yeah, it was always there, like Trumot u'Maasrot, Bikurim. Was like when the temple will come, we'll do that. Exactly. And it was in the prayers all the time too.
So it's something that people like us, especially for Naomi, living not too far away from Jerusalem, but also living in the lands which the Bible mostly focuses on, it was a reality. And you have to remember the laws of Niddah when it comes to the temple, and we'll talk about this maybe another time. But the laws of Niddah when it comes to the temple are affect everyone. I mean, it's really on a level where certain elements of privacy have to be eliminated. For example, if you're going to the temple and then you show up and where's your daughter or where's your wife, people will know why they're not there. But we have to remember that the concept of tzniut, of privacy, of being modest does not exactly the exact same criteria as we have today. And sometimes certain things have to be done in a very unprivate way. But the thing that's really problematic is the fact that a woman's menstrual cycle, especially in a marriage, is a relatively private thing. You don't need your neighborhood to know when your wife is clean and unclean. And because basically when the wife is clean or unclean, it also tells you when certain acts are done. And I think one of the issues that I personally came up with when we got married was the fact that I had to go to a rabbi, with something that might indicate the existence of blood. And the rabbi, in many cases was a man of confidence, but I was the one who had to go and show a man, one man showing another man something that has no relation to men at all. And I always felt very strange with this. And when I offered this concept to Naomi, and I said, let's have a woman talk about this, you said, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, many places use men as the poskim,
the person who gives the final word.
The final wording, but you have, like in the settlement I grew up in, so there was a woman checking if it's blood or not. And if there was a question, she would take it to the rabbi. But most places, it's not strong enough.
Most places really just have only a man. And I think that it's very, very wrong that men are so involved, because at the end of the day, what it does, I personally think it creates a weakness.
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing on one hand, but it also creates a weakness. What the weakness it creates is it makes women feel as if they're less reliable. I mean, you have to remember something very simple. If we take the traditional position of a woman takes care of the education of children up to a certain age. A woman takes care of the household, meaning cooking. So if you sit down to eat your food, how do you know your wife is giving you something that's clean or unclean? Is it really kosher, as we would say? What do you do? And can you trust your wife when it comes to her menstrual cycle? Remember, menstrual cycle, if a man lays with a woman that has a menstrual cycle, it is a capital punishment. It's an isur karet, as we know. It's a prohibition of karet. Can you trust your wife with making sure that your clothing doesn't have anything forbidden in it? Can you trust your wife not bringing idols into the house? I think that people don't realize that women are actually the pillar of the house. The education of children from a very young age comes from the mother. Children link themselves more to the mother.
They do. I think I grew up that in a avira feeling.
An environment
that they said that the woman is the pillar of the house, but Niddah wise, it's like, we can't trust you.
Which I think is an oxymoron. I think it's a contradiction. And so this is why I think that not only with our background, as people who actually grew up with Tanakh, and especially Naomi, with her very strong Tanakh background, I think that having a woman's voice in this subject and understanding the actual burden, the burden on the woman's shoulders, and then saying, you're going to have that burden on your shoulders, but we are going to be the ones who make the final decision. I think that there's something wrong there. And in truth, through my research as a scholar, looking at the subject of Niddah, I think that really in truth, for a very, very long time, women were actually entrusted with many subjects, including clean and unclean at a lot of different levels, and no one treated them as being stupid. No one. I mean, I think that part of
it's not stupid. It's just.
I personally think that some of the attitude there represents women as if they're ignorant, and the reason I say this is because I understand that at the time where this rose in the Jewish world, it was also going on in the Catholic world. Women were removed from position of authority in the churches, and I think this echoed throughout the entire world, where women were excluded from from religious functions. I mean, look at for example, the case of Hannah. I mean, we both studied the book of Shmuel together, and together and also separately when we were in school. And Hannah, for example, she walks all the way up to the altar. Yeah. If we didn't trust women, then how could she walk all the way up there? I mean, don't you agree with me?
I agree with you, yeah.
So I think that when we discuss the subject of the laws of Niddah, I think women have to have more of a say.
I think that if there's like a difficult question, a man has to answer it because he's the one who sits and studies all day. But in the simple questions and the simple stuff, I think you can trust a woman.
I think you agree that there's a tendency for people to be a little bit too concerned, and they run off every time to ask the rabbi.
Yeah, there is, because it's really scary. It's like it's something that they put in our heads so strongly that if you do not do this, you'll,
And do you agree with it? I mean, who's a bigger expert? You on your own body?
I think it's a burden to be lachutz. A bit nervous from this. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, but
it's a burden.
But you're saying something very important here. You're saying here that they basically pressure you.
It's a bit of pressure, I think.
But let me ask a very simple question. You, when you were studying the laws of Niddah, did you feel as if someone was making you pressured to think that you always have to run to a rabbi to ask a man about this? Or was it something that was the environment you grew up in?
I think the rabbis do say every question you have, come to us, even if you think you know. But we had a rabbi that said that.
Yeah, we had a rabbi that said, but no, what he actually said was it's always better to ask a question. That's at least the way I understood it. It's always better to ask a
I
question.
grew up like that, so I cannot answer the question.
Okay. No, but let's ask something. Let's ask something much simpler than that. Who knows your body better than yourself?
Obviously, me. I know every woman knows her own body.
Okay, so you as a woman actually know your cycle. You also learn to identify what is blood and what isn't blood.
I think in the beginning you do need someone to guide you because the colors and stuff. But after you get the idea and the feeling, then I think you can know most of it by yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So first of all, what exactly is Niddah? Niddah is, the word Niddah is, the concept is to cause something to be in a distance. Okay, Lenadot is to create a distance between you and something else. So the Isha Niddah basically means a woman who is put in a distance from the rest of the society or the rest of the household. And the reason of this is because, it depends where. The Bible, the Torah, you remember reading it, the Torah doesn't give you any kind of spiritual explanation here. It only says that it's considered to be unclean. It doesn't relate anything to demons.
No, these are the rules, follow them, and that's it.
Yeah, So
they say it's unclean, and that's it.
Exactly, but the thing is that, for example, you've heard the stories of what happens to certain African tribes. You remember those stories? There was the story about that they actually certain African tribes have a special hut that the woman goes to and lives there during her period, and then she leaves.
They say it's an Jewish Ethiopian too.
Yeah, so the Ethiopians, for example, kept the laws of Niddah very strictly, more strict than what most of us live by, even in Orthodox Judaism. So it's very interesting to see how extreme some of these communities went.
She's not supposed to touch anything, and it's like a free week. Yeah.
So the references of Niddah, I mean, they're basically two places that kind of mention this, but the most important section is actually in the book of Numbers, and the book of Numbers mentions a series of bodily excretions that cause people to be unclean. And the more severe an excretion is, the longer the period of time is between being pure and impure. And the description itself is that the person, the series itself in the Torah itself is more about 7 days. I mean, you remember this. There's always this ongoing cycle of 7 days. Everything is inside 7 days.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to ask you as the expert here. I mean, does this cycle really last 7 days?
Some do. Some have 5 days.
Okay, so some cycles, I mean, medically speaking...
A normal cycle is up to 7 days. If it's over, even the doctors say there's a problem.
Okay, so we can actually say very clearly the Torah actually takes the numeral 7 here as not only as a topological number, which is basically a number that has a spiritual meaning or some significance, but it's actually talking out of a very real practical reality. That it's actually saying 7 days is the maximum amount of days for a normal cycle, for a normal period. Exactly. So really what we're looking at is we would say that you're saying that on average it's about 5 days, but it can go up to 7 days.
I don't know what's average. Some have 5. I heard a few have that 4 days, but that's unusual.
Okay. Okay. So no, this is very important because, for example, when you take the numeral 7, you take 7 in the Torah. 7 days here in this specific case is actually very practical. It's not some mystical number that we hear about, like, for example, the 7 days for the purification of the leper, the 7 days for a person who basically has this type of gonorrhea. We're actually talking about something which is very, very realistic. So we have these 7 days, and in these 7 days, obviously, there are stronger days, there are weaker days, and really, medically speaking, because I studied biology as well, the amount of blood is not huge.
Huge.
It's not huge. I mean, we're not talking about, massive bleeding. If you have massive bleeding, it means there's something wrong.
Usually a miscarriage.
It can be a miscarriage. Yes, something that happens as well.
Yeah.
But basically, so we have the 7 days are a very, very practical number. So I would say here the Torah mentions these 7 days because of the fact that it actually does last 7 days. And what's very, very interesting here as well, there are two very interesting things I need to point out here. The Torah doesn't give us an explanation of how to purify. If you remember, it does not say, it doesn't say anything.
It says you have to rinse.
No, it doesn't even say that.
No, it doesn't?
It doesn't even say that.
I don't.
The Torah doesn't even say that. And the other thing as well that comes out of this is that we also have is a thing known as zava. Do you care to explain what zava is?
Zava is if your period is more than 7 days.
Exactly. So we basically have several categories here, which are basically.
There's another kind of zava too. Zava could be that between periods you're bleeding again.
Yeah, so we basically have two types of extra bleeding that can exist, and and you've experienced stuff like this as well. You've had unfortunately we had at least two miscarriages. One major miscarriage that happened quite a few years ago, and that obviously causes bleeding, and that bleeding is also considered to be forbidden. So let's clarify something very specific here. And you have to excuse us, this is the first time we do this, so we're still learning the dynamic of working with one another in something like this, and this is why I'm taking most of the microphone time. We have to understand the following. The definition of Niddah, the biological definition of Niddah, is bleeding from the actual uterus.
Yeah.
It's bleeding from the actual uterus, and
yeah, so basically if you're bleeding and you feel like a burn inside, you have to check where the blood comes from, because it could be just a pattern.
It can be a
wound. That you scraped yourself or something, or it could be real blood from the wound.
From the womb, exactly.
Yeah.
So from the uterus or the womb, and the because actually uterus and womb are. It doesn't matter. Basically, the bleeding has to be internal. It's basically what we can actually call an actual cycle, or a type of bleeding that is extracted from the peeling of the uterus wall, which causes the bleeding itself. So that's number one. So the actual bleeding from the uterus. But then we have to remember there's a second type of bleeding, which can be bleeding of a miscarriage, which we mentioned. And the third type of bleeding that can exist is abnormalities that happen, like for example there are certain glands inside the body, inside the area of the uterus, that can cause abnormal bleeding, and you have to be in contact with a doctor when you see a bleeding that's unusual. Women tend to bleed because they're scared.
It could be because stress. If it's just stress bleeding once in a while, no worries, but you have rules to follow.
Yeah, you have to, in any one of these three cases, these are all cases of bleeding that actually originates from inside the uterus, from inside the body itself. And all these three cases are going to be either in the category of Niddah, which is a regular cycle, or the concept of Ziva. Because really, bleeding that's caused by a woman being scared or stressed, and it's happened to you.
It happens.
Even to a level if something's very sensitive, then someone can make a loud noise and you jump. It causes a contraction inside your body.
It could. Mostly it's from stress, life stress, not.
Yeah, it can be caused from life stress, but it can also be caused by being scared and everything. And that literally is the concept of zava. The thing is follows. The zava comes from the word zav, which is to flow. So the main, or one of the part of the reasons why zava is called zava is because it's a continuous flow. Because a normal period, you can explain it better than I do.
A normal period, you have a month between the beginning of one period to the next period. And it's about 7 days. So you start counting from the first day you got your period to the first day you got your next period. It's about 26 to 29 days.
That varied. So the first tip that Naomi basically says is, first of all...
One second. It could be also 24 days, but you should go to the doctor to fix that.
Exactly.
But that's still a period.
So rule number one that Naomi tells us is be aware of when your period is and how much time passes from one session of period to the other.
By the day.
Also to be very aware of how long it is.
Usually, we are guided to have a
diary.
A diary that you just write in your diary when you got your period, when it ended, when you get your next period.
In other words, learn your body.
Yeah, and write it down because you forget.
And by the way, what happens as well is the husband gets into a better understanding of this, and he can also become a little more sensitive when it happens and be a little bit nicer because it can cause cramps and stuff like that. Men, learn to be nice to your wife when she's having her period. She's also the mother of your children. Remember, it's a burden. It's a burden. It's a very uncomfortable burden.
Yes.
So for tip number one for a regular cycle is keep track of it. Keep track of things. Be very aware of.
Write it down.
Write it down, exactly. Be very aware of it, because if you also need to be aware of if it's during the day or during the night it begins.
Yeah.
That's another tip that we know of.
I wanted to say that too.
Yeah, to be aware of when in the calendar it happens and when in the day.
You should write the hour, because sometimes you have 8 in the morning, 8 in the morning, 8 in the and every morning at 8. So you know what to expect.
Exactly. You know more or less when it's going to happen if you're fairly regular. Women which are not fairly regular, it's a bit more complex than that. So the moment you know that, and then suddenly you start seeing a bleeding that's outside of that cycle,
that's zava.
That's zava. But the term zava itself comes from the concept of flowing with blood, which means to do with the period doesn't accelerate and then start dropping. It actually just continues. So that's the concept of to flow. That's really what ziva is, and that can occur from the things we just described. When that happens, obviously, if it goes on for a very long while,
then first of all go to a doctor,
yeah.
Check it out, and then you have to. From the time the bleeding stops, you have to wait a week, 7 days.
You have
that you make sure that your body is totally clean.
Yeah, totally clean. And how do you make sure your body's totally clean?
We buy these small pieces of cloth.
Very soft cloth, by the way.
Very soft cloth that you basically put on your finger and into your. How's it called?
I don't remember what the technical term is. You get the idea where you're supposed to put it.
And then you basically check. You just put it in and take it out and check if you see if it's red or if it's white.
Exactly, and also there can be a lot of different colors. I mean, the
It could be yellow. Yellow is still okay. If it's pinkish, then you have to start thinking.
Yeah, I don't need to go too much into female anatomy and how the female reproductive organ takes care of itself, but basically there are also natural fluids that need to be there as well. Okay, to be very, very blunt about it.
You should have something on it. If it's clear or if it's yellow or if it's red, something.
Yeah, there'll anyhow be some kind of a color there. But the whole principle here is that you need to make sure that the body has completely cleansed itself. And sometimes there can still be a little bit of blood still coming out of the uterus that
you don't see
that doesn't actually leave the body. And there's actually an ongoing debate: is that really considered to be a niddah or a zava? Because this can apply also to the concept of niddah as well. Because a woman, before she cleanses herself after the 7th day, and we'll explain, there's a bit of a trick here regarding the 7th day when it comes to rabbinic Judaism and what the Tanakh actually describes, and that we'll actually touch on that. We'll touch on that next time, because we want to keep these recordings as short as possible. Yes. So we actually need to kind of wrap this up, because Naomi
I have to just check something in the oven.
You need to check something in the oven. Okay, let's stop here for a split second. Naomi's going to run to check the oven. As you know, this is a functional house. So you go check the oven. I'll continue talking. And the thing that we basically have to deal here as well with is the fact that there's a question of how clean do you actually have to be. This is more of a discussion in the halachic world or a discussion in Torah about how clean do you actually have to be. And I think we can draw on some of these rules based on the laws of the Zav. The Zav has to make sure that there is literally no fluids coming out of his body. He has to make sure that there is no excretion that he could recognize as forbidden excretion. And unlike, for example, there are certain fluids that can come out of the male organ which are perfectly normal, the excretion of the Zav is considered to be something a bit thicker, not necessarily like semen, but something thick and basically unhealthy. And I think if it's this, a man is not going to try to stuff in a piece of cloth into there. It's impractical. But the idea is that at least on, and also you're not supposed to shove this piece of cloth like deep inside.
No. Where you get to it, like you put on your finger, and the deepest you get in your finger, not.
You're not.
Don't wound yourself.
Exactly. Don't try to push this straight into your body. It's not what you're trying to look for.
You have to be sensitive and careful when you do it because you can't scratch yourself.
Exactly. So and people might be asking themselves about the does the Torah actually say you have to do this? And Torah doesn't mention anything like this. But we know as a fact that this is a practice being done for a very, very long time, and especially when it comes to the temple. We also have to remember that the ilchot Niddah, the laws of Niddah, are of a very serious matter. So because if you don't make sure it's 100% clean, then you have a problem. And we know out of practical descriptions of how they kept purity in the temple, it was relatively extreme.
Yeah, it was much more extreme than what we do today.
So
you wouldn't sit.
You wouldn't sit on the chair that a woman sat on and stuff like that would actually make you unclean. But the thing that I want to lead to here as well is basically to realize that this is not something you pull out your sleeve. I won't be surprised that in a culture where keeping clean was very, very important, it actually had practical implications to people's lives, because you can't be with your wife. Forget about the whole thing of can you hold her hand in the middle of the sea when she's having her menstrual cycle. That's regardless of the discussion. The actual sexual act, if the woman is unclean, is a serious matter, and it will not be surprised if there's such a serious matter. People did take this extremity even at a very, very early stage. Now, the last thing I want to mention here before we finish this program, and believe me, now that I feel more the dynamic, next time will be a lot more structured. But the concept of what you mentioned earlier, so we have actual bleeding from the uterus, and then we have extra bleeding because of different things that can happen. But then we also have to remember there's also bleeding that comes from injuring.
Yes. So when you first of all, when you're injured, you feel it. You feel a burn inside. You feel that it's not deep inside, but usually you can feel where it is if you touch it most, like you touch the area with the cloth.
So not every time you see blood, there's a problem. You just have to be very aware of it. This is not going to make you into what's known as Niddah. It's just a situation where you have to be aware of the fact that you can injure yourself. And as a biology major, by the way, we, and especially as a person who continued reading more biology even after I was done, the thing is that also the level of wetness each woman can be at is different. It's very, very different. And this has two practical sides to it. First of all, that if a woman cuts herself and she's a person who has more fluids, some of this blood can actually leave the body and show up on the underwear. That's not a situation that you have to be concerned about. We will talk about more about quantities.
You can usually also see if the blood that you have on your underwear is a wound blood or a blood from the uterus, because you can see it's not only blood. If it's a wound, you can see it's like a spot of blood with other liquids. That's a big sign.
Yeah, there are things.
But don't count on it. Check inside.
Exactly. The moment you see something which is more than just, it doesn't look as if you had something like a dropping of blood from your body, but something that looks more like, if I may dare, as not being a wound, but I'll say this: if you notice that the color, the way it's cut, the way it shows up indicates that it showed up together with a flow of fluids in general.
It's usually like a bunch of colors together, colors together. It's not like one shade.
Yeah,
Or not.
So if we're talking about a bleeding out of the uterus, it's going to be like one color,
Yes.
usually bright, like
Um,
fresh blood.
If it's a wound, it's brighter. If it's from the uterus, it's darker.
Oh, so it's the other way around.
I think.
Yeah, I remember that there's
A wound will be brighter.
Yeah, because usually blood from the uterus is also blood that's been accumulating there for a short while.
I'm not sure exactly why.
So usually a wound is fresh blood, while blood from the uterus is in many cases is something that's been there for a couple of hours, I would say, before it comes out.
Yeah, I'm guessing. But just to keep it practical here, what we do if it's a wound and not blood from the uterus, first of all, if when you touch it or when you don't touch it, you feel it
The burn.
and from inside, and then you carefully, not to open it up again, you take another cloth and try that the cloth will be perfectly clean when you avoid that spot. And
Yeah.
if that is clean when you avoid the spot, or it has like one spot which or like every time you check yourself there's like the same spot all the time, that means it's a wound.
Yeah, and what we'll do for the next recording, I'll check more in depth the whole subject of what color of blood's supposed to show up when it comes out of the uterus versus when it's a cut. But basically, these are the situations where blood will actually happen. So I hope we've covered this subject, which is basically, I'm going to call this "What is blood?" We can basically call it, and that will probably be the title. And what we're going to do next time, basically, is explain what is done and not done during the time of Niddah. That will take us not very long. I'm assuming this is going to be 2 or 3 recordings. What is done and not done during the period of Niddah, and what exactly is the preparation to the purification, and also what is the place you purify yourself. And as an added subject, we'll talk about some contrast between what the Tanakh says and what is actually practiced in Judaism. So this is why I say I think that part we'll talk about that maybe in a third segment. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope we haven't bored you to death.
Thank you for listening.
I want to thank my wife for joining me, taking a time out of her very, very, very busy schedule. I am telling you, I am a very, very active man, and I admire my wife. Admire her for everything that she does. I mean, I have times when I'm just so exhausted I collapse. And even with everything she has to do, she'll just stop for a second, run to the room, and look at me and say, "Do you need anything?" I mean, she's literally an Eshet Chayil. And for her to actually be able, first of all, take the time to actually sit here out of her very, very busy schedule, and she's a very, very busy woman, helping, raising the kids and giving me the time to study. And and she knows how much I study. I mean, even sitting here, we're staring at a pile of about 10 books that I'm supposed to be working with, and really, and the things that I've learned from her throughout the years are just amazing as well. And this is why I think she's a wonderful asset for studying this material, because not only she's very practical, she's also very aware of things. So again, I want to thank you, sweetie, for joining us, and I hope the people listening to this have enjoyed it. And trust me, next recordings will be a lot more structured, and here we were trying more to feel how it works and if it goes well. And I think we touched on some very, very important subjects. Obviously, when a husband and wife do a recording, there's always a lot of fluff in between, but the point here is to bring practical things into the real world. and not just talk about just things in theory. As you can see, she gave us a lot of very, very practical advice, stuff that, though I am very aware of, I think it's better that we hear from her. So thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
And God willing, Bezrat Hashem,
We'll do another one.
We'll do another one, and maybe, we'll see how this goes, and maybe we'll pick some topics. Like, for example, some people ask me about children's education, how to educate children to keeping Torah.
We can do that.
Keeping Shabbat in a Torah-keeping and observant house, Shabbat fun. What do Torah-keeping families do for Shabbat? In my case, it's mostly sleeping, and things like that. So thank you for joining us. Yes.
Shabbat fun is no screen, no fighting of the screen.
No television. Families that you don't use electricity on Shabbat have it the best
It's
because
so much fun.
no television, nothing to
My turn, his turn.
No, but not only the fighting between children, it's also the issue of like detaching from the world and focusing on what's important, which is studying the Torah, being with family, educating your children,
playing
and so on.
with your kids on the table.
Yeah, playing with your kids with
a real toy.
With a real toy instead of here's a PlayStation, play. Anyways, everyone, thank you for joining us. And if you have any recommendations for programs, please email me at hebrewisrael@gmail.com. You can also just leave a comment on YouTube where this video is going to be placed, and also on other media that I have. Also remember, you can visit HebrewInIsrael.net, which is our website. And again, if there are any practical questions to Naomi or to myself, feel free to ask us. If there are any specific situations, we can help. But please remember, we're not here to replace a rabbi. We're not here to replace anything. Serious questions have to be taken to your physician and to whomever you perceive as being an authority.
One last thing. If you go to a gynecologist and he does some, whatever,
any procedures that could injure
you or bleed your uterus, always ask him if you will bleed from the uterus or it will be an injury. That's how you know how to look at this blood.
Exactly. So you see, something I would never be able to think about because I don't even know what a gynecologist looks like.
That's what they teach us from the beginning.
I've seen it. I've seen a gynecologist before, but I have no idea what they do. You see, practical knowledge of the real world. Anyhow, thank you, Naomi, for being here this week.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, and hope you join us again in the future.